Hey guys, as I've promised yesterday on my April wrap-up, I'm going to do my 2 cents on The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. Well, to start, this is a novel that can be split up into 2 parts, not because it's been written in 2 parts, but there are 2 plot threads that kind of semi-interweave. We have, on the one hand, of course, the sci-fi part where we have our scientist and his machine, his actual time machine and the science behind that. But on the other hand, we have this lost world-ish discovery, adventure, stuff like that, of where he lands in the future. And this is kind of the precursor to sci-fi because there's a bit of sci-fi in it, but it's more like the adventure novels of that time. That said, we have our narrator who begins the story going to the time traveler, our actual main character. He's going to the time traveler's house. He's been invited to this dinner party and with some of the other elites. So considering this was Victorian era or late Victorian era, there was a kind of a class division. And they get invited to the time traveler's house, and we don't get any names, we just get descriptions like the psychologist or the young man, the time traveler, the guest, of course, the narrator. And the only thing we actually know for sure is that, of course, our time traveler is a scientist, and that our narrator is his best friend, or as they call it, his most regular guest, I think is the wording he uses in the book. He's implied to be a writer because he has an appointment with an editor, if I am correct. I can't really remember the exact term, but it's something like that. Our narrator is also the only one that actually entertains the idea or is open to the idea of time travel or of the possibility of time travel. And we start at that meeting where our narrator is in a conversation with our time traveler, and he's actually explaining to the others the science behind his machine and the implications of the science behind it, of course, and also exploring time as the 4th dimension. So we have height and width and depth. And then we also, I don't know the correct English terms, but we have the 3 dimensions as we know, and then of course the spectrum of the 4th dimension, because we all know that even though something is there in 3 dimensions, well, at least he says we all know, if it's not there in time, then does it really exist? So even though it's not accurate, the science behind it, it does give us a glimpse as a reader, scientifically educated or not, how complex the matter really is. And that's the first part before he gets into his time machine. And then at the ending, after our adventure story that's actually smack dab in the middle of it, we get another sci-fi-ish part where he travels into the way distant future and sees this bleak dystopian future where our sun is already red and has dimmed a bit, and the earth has stopped spinning, so there's like this eternal day side and this eternal moon side, and then the twilight on the verge of it. And then then there's giant crabs or crab-like creatures on that world, which is millions of years in the future. And then he goes even further in the future. I think it's about 30 million years that's described, I can't remember exactly. And there he sees this big black amorph creature with tentacles as the only sign of life. And he cannot breathe, or has a lot of difficulty to breathe just because the air has grown so thin. So that's the sci-fi parts of this story, and then, as I've mentioned, in the middle of it is the adventure part, where our time traveler recounts the events of his time travel to our guests, where he lands, I think it's 802,700 and something years in the future. So yeah, in about 800,000 years time, give or take a few years, where he meets this dwarfen-like race of humanoid creatures called the Eloi, I think. Eloi is it spelled. It's some kind of the plural of a Hebrew word, I think. Elohim. Oh, I read it's something with gods, but I can't remember the exact translation. That said, totally off topic. And those creatures are very small. I think they're about 4 feet. I think is the exact, well, not the exact, but is the average length of them. I'm not really sure where it's mentioned, so I'm not going to look for it. But they are very small, and they live this very peaceful and idyllic life. They know no fire. They know no fear. They don't eat meat. They have this fruit-based diet. They have these big machines that are like ventilation systems, which seem to balance out the environment, apparently. And then when he gets back from his first round of exploring, he goes back to his time machine, or to where he parked his time machine, and it's gone. So he's stuck in time, which causes him to, of course, have a forced extended stay with the Eloi. But bit by bit, it's revealed that they have not actually evolved, but rather have degenerated in time. You know, their language is very simple. It's verbs and nouns mostly. There are few adverbs. There are no abstract concepts as well. They are scared of fire. They're scared of the night. They cannot maintain the upkeep of buildings, as we will see in the novel itself, because our time traveler sees that everything has deteriorated. The old buildings, especially, he gets into this old crappy ruin of a building, and it turns out to be an old museum. They kind of got lazy, I think. I'll get to that a bit later. But he has this small loving relationship as well with a girl called Weena, after he saves her life, because I think they were washing themselves in the river, but because they're so weak and lazy and simpletons, really, no one even bothers to save her life, or no one even bothers to try. So he saves her life, and she just stalks him. I do have to say that relationship is not really that big of a deal, except for some offhand comments, and it's not explored that much. Those machines I've talked about are also operated by an unknown force, because he sees that the Eloi have no idea what to do. They don't even think about it even. But while he's staying there, you know, when everything is being revealed bit by bit, he learns why the Eloi are afraid of the dark as well, and that's because of the Morlocks, which is a branch of the human race that has evolved in a different way, having adapted to living underground, becoming more beast-like and becoming albino-like even, I think, or ape-like. And they're the evolved lower class of Wells's time, while the Eloi are, of course, the descendants of the elite. You know, given the social class difference I've already mentioned with the time traveler story. It's implied that those Morlocks eat and hunt and prey on the Eloi, while on the other hand also making clothes and sandals and stuff like that, and, you know, the shoes and the machines, probably out of habit or out of instinct, because they have evolved in that way. And while they're weak, they're stronger than the Eloi as well. And there's a lot of them. So it's kind of like a swarm. it gets revealed that they are the ones who operate the machines, because our time traveler actually goes down one of those ventilation shafts or one of those wells through a ladder into the world of the Morlocks, so another underworld in the new lost world, to retrieve his time machine. Because he kind of figures out that they stole it because it was underneath some kind of pedestal, underneath a statue of a sphinx, so he deduced that going underground would lead him somewhere to there. And then he goes down into that well, but he gets attacked by the Morlocks. He finds out that they're afraid of fire and light, so he lights his matches one after the other, and suddenly he's almost out of matches. So there's a surprising amount of tension that is generated by wells, which is very, very well done, especially in such a low page count. There's a lot of suspension generated by him just because of the lack of matches. Something so simple is actually very, very good writing. And eventually he gets chased out of their realm or their land and tries to find a place to hide from Morlocks. He takes Weena and then runs. It's there when he discovers the museum. God, I couldn't think of that word. But he finds some weapons as well. I think he finds camphor, something that's highly flammable, and then a new pack of matches, and some kind of lever from a big machine as well, that he uses later on as a bat or as a club to, attack or to defend himself, let's put it mildly. While running from those Morlocks, because they came after him, he starts a fire, thinking, oh yeah, I'll just start a small fire to keep them at bay. But then again, they don't know fire, so they have no idea how to extinguish it. And that small fire turns into an entire forest going up in flames. They all run. He kills some Morlocks in the chaos. There's a battle where they all swarm him. Weena gets killed in the process because she gets jumped and most likely eaten as well. And some others actually run into the fire just because they want to know what it is. So there's chaos all around in just a few pages, and this is a short but sweet scene. And then he finally goes back and finds his machine. He immediately jumps on it, beats off the other Morlocks that came after him, that's tried to grab him and touch him, and he goes into the future. And that's where he goes to meet this giant crab thing I've already talked about. There's also this deleted scene, which I discovered after reading, where which is in between this escape and the giant crabs I told about, where he lands into this ice age-like Earth, where he sees little furry hopping herbivore creatures that look like kangaroos, but when he kills and stuns one of them, I don't know exactly what happens, but I know he takes a rock and throws it, and he examines it. It turns out that it's a descendant of us, so of the Eloi and the Morlocks. I don't know if it's interbreeding, I don't know if it's devolving or evolving into these small creatures, but then he sees this huge centipede-like monster, escapes to the next day with his time machine, and he sees that the tiny humanoid-ish creature, the furry hopping stuff, is gone, so being eaten. And I think this would have been great in hindsight. I did not miss it during reading or while reading, but on the other hand, in hindsight, this would have been great just to get a transition that's a bit smoother than just going from humans or human-like species to nothing and crabs. So this would have been a great transit point, actually. But I didn't miss it. It was published in a few editions, but not much. It was cut by the editor of the originals. So yeah, that's it. And I think, all in all, this was a good book. It's a dystopian version of the perfection of society. Is the best word, I think, where the pampered humans, the decadent elite, actually don't know how to take care of themselves anymore. and the upper class is terrified of the lower class, as I've already mentioned. The message here being that society has to change, which is something said 130 years ago, mind you, before we end up like those two branches of human evolution, being the decadence of the elite and the devolving of the Morlocks to these mindless brute workers is kind of a social critique on capitalism, I think. So, social commentary, yeah, a bit like Brave New World, which I read last month actually, which is something that is also critique, commentary, something like that. Another great point, I believe, was the evolving theory of our human scientist, where he not really changing it, but broadening it as he discovers new information. At first, he thinks humans have perfected life, becoming stupid and lazy, just because they have lost every need to fight, every semblance of a need to fight even. And then he discovers the Morlocks, that's the second phase, and he thinks they're the slaves of the Eloi, and this is the society there is an extreme evolution of capitalism, even dividing the classes more and more, up to a point that they evolve to different species. And then he discovers in the third phase that they hunt the Eloi, and that the Morlocks have passed the second stage of his theory and are now forced to hunt them or to prey on the Eloi, on their former masters, in a revolutionary proletariat revenge-like story. Yeah, revolution style, where, you know, the lower class rising up, just like I did read in Red Rising, but, you know, more extreme, because it's no, very much like that, even because Red Rising, their classes are also an evolution or even different species of humans, because they have different body types and different they can't even breed with one another. They have different amounts of fingers and heights and loads and stuff like that. So yeah, kind of very much like Red Rising, now that I think about it. And this might have been a great inspiration for it. I haven't wondered, I wonder why I didn't think of this sooner, actually, because it only now just drops. While considering the score, for the ending score, as I've already mentioned yesterday, I'd give a 6.5 out of 10 for the story, because it wasn't that special, even though it was very innovative for its time. I would give it a 7.5 for the teams, just because of the social commentary, the social critique, and his theory, which, well, yeah, it's not perfect, it's not scientific in any way, but it just, yeah, it kind of gives us an insight into our future. But he did manage to cram a lot of tension, and a sense of wonder into a very low page count. I think, you know, with this huge font, not a huge, big font for what I'm used to, there's not even 100, I think it's 125, just to be safe. I'm checking, it's 123 pages with this big font, so I think this will be, what, about 40k words. I think it just is just under enough words for the classification of a novella, or just above it. 35,000 words, I think. So yeah, this is a great read if you have about 2 hours of time on your hands. I'd give it a 7.5 out of 10, and my mission's accomplished. I'll see you guys next week. Bye bye.